So, yep. So I like what, there you go. So this is a, how can I got it, never mind. So this is a really important quote. This comes from E.B. Wedmore's an English author in A Manual of Beekeeping. And I mean, this really hits the nail on the head. That almost every emergency of management can be met forthwith by putting something into or taking something out of a nucleus. Absolutely. And so that's what the whole system is built on, is nucleus colonies and how they can help you in your apiary. So go ahead. So are your bees alive in the spring? Yeah. Or are they dead from? Go ahead. So there's, oh my gosh, starvation. So, or dysentery, this is our typical 3-story hive in the winter. And for whatever reason it is, whatever stressful reason it is, they have dysentery. That'll kill the bees. Go ahead. Nosema, possibly. These are Nosema spores that I squished out of a bee and looked at a slide, and one poor little bee had just millions of spores. I mean, that's a huge number of spores. Could be that. Could be this. I don't know if you've had bees long enough to know what tracheal mite is. Acarapis, acarine disease, but this is what it looks like. This is what it looked like. We haven't seen it in a number of years, but this is what it would look like in the middle of the winter. It's cold outside. It's 25 degrees. The bees aren't flying. No other colonies in the apiary are flying, and this one's boiling out and dying in the snow. And in the springtime, there's a big pile of bees dead on the ground, and there's no bees left in the hive. And this was tracheal mite. Until we could breed it out of them, which it only took a few years, that we lost a lot of bees. So it could have been that. Go ahead. And of course, we all know this one. And we're all losing bees from varroa mites. And I don't care how you treat them, how you don't treat them, what you do, and what cells you use, and you're still going to lose bees to varroa mites. You think after 30 years we'd be farther along, but we aren't. So I mean, there's promises, but I don't know. You think cattle doesn't take so long? Why does it take so long with these little bugs? Anyway, go ahead. Then of course, then you could have something like this happen. Obviously black bears. I mean, in England, they want to know if it was badgers. I said, no, it's not badgers. It's black bears. And the fence failed, and in 2 weeks, she destroyed every hive in the yard. So, I mean, you can lose your bees from all these different reasons. Go ahead. Does it matter? Really, what does matter? It's how you replace your dead colonies of honeybees. That's what matters. Go ahead. So what can you do? You can catch swarms, right? Okay, you catch swarms. We don't see swarms around here. Any swarms around here are from our bone bees. And they're always too high in the tree anyway. I tell all my help when we go to the yard, don't look up, because we're not going after them, so don't look up. But we don't see them anymore because all the bee trees are dead, and we can split the colonies. Well, what does that do to your colony? So if you have a short season and you split your colony, you'll have 2 colonies, but you won't make much of a honey crop, no, at least not here. And go ahead. You can buy nukes. You know how much those cost now. I have seen nucleus colonies for $250, $35. You get those fancy California queens, Oh my goodness, they want packages over $200 for a package of bees. Oh my goodness. I don't know.
It doesn't sound too outrageous to me. Most people sell them for about $250 here.
Right, for nukes?
Yep.
Wow.
And as a producer, I don't have a problem with the price, by the way.
Yeah, right, for sure. I understand, nor do I. But my first packages, you understand, were $10.50. So, so anyway, so what about package bees? Well, I used to rail a lot about package bees, and I sort of gave up on that. I think everybody knows the deal with package bees. There can be problems with package bees. There's an inherent problem with package bees that there's an imbalance in the population, and by the time any brood is hatching out, it's been weeks, and all the bees are old bees, and they supersede the queen, and but you got to do what you got to do. You know, obviously the cure of that is to put a frame of emerging brood in the package at around 10 days, and then they have instant nurse bees. But so yeah, package bees are expensive, and you don't get much. You know, I mean, if you're going to buy bees, obviously it's nukes are better. But go ahead. But suppose you have these in your apiary. So, like right now in your case, that they came through the winter like this, all created from your bees last summer, from a minimum of resources, and they grow into a unit like this right in your apiary. It's, you know, it's invaluable. Go ahead. So I always wondered to know, where did this all begin, this wintering of nucleus colonies? I heard about it from Kirk Webster. And I thought this guy's brilliant, because he's invented this way of wintering over nucleus colonies, but then I started buying bee books, old bee books from the late 1800s, early 1900s, 1940s, and go ahead. And I found out that, my goodness, everybody wintered nucleus colonies. This was the way back in the day. So yes, Webster published in '95 in the American Bee Journal on this. But then Vernon Vickery from Montreal, from McGill, professor emeritus of entomology, he wintered nucleus colonies in the prairies of Manitoba in 1990, and said it was the solution for the closed border to American imports of packages. Of course, Brother Adam did. We all know Brother Adam did. Well, then it was sort of starting to become pretty evident that Kirk read Brother Adam. And then, so I got even farther into it. Manley, R.O.B. Manley, and great British beekeeper, first person in the British Isles to have 1,000 colonies. He wintered nucleus colonies. Snellgrove of the Snellgrove Board wintered nucleus colonies. Go ahead. Back one. Miller, C.C. Miller wintered nucleus colonies. And I came across a passage that Miller wrote, is saying that you could winter 2 nucleus colonies in a box, and they would form one cluster, you know, a double box with a divider, and they would form one cluster as if the divider was shoved down between them. We discovered that before I ever read that, and the nucleus colonies, they're sort of forming one cluster in the box, a semicircular cluster on either side of the divider. Well, here is Miller in 1911 saying the same thing. There's Ron Brown, wrote a book, 1,000 Years of Devon Beekeeping, and he writes about a beekeeper in 1862 that was a skepist, and he made nukes in his skeps, and he cut the bottom eek up, which is a ring on the bottom. So he cut it off. It's full of bees and brood. He put it on a new bottom, put a cover on it. They'd raise a queen, and this is in the middle of the summer, and the next year he'd have a nuke. It's the same thing in 1862. And then one of the best ones is Leslie Bill from, she was with Brother Adam when he went to look for Monticola bees in Africa, and she wrote a book, The Love of Bees, and she highlighted Brother Columbian, who was Brother Adam's teacher when he was young, and Brother Columbian devised a beehive that he could overwinter 4 nucleus colonies in it, and then he'd overwinter them, and in the spring he would use the excess brood to boost production hives and use the brood wherever. So remember that, because I'll talk about that later. Go ahead. So just go ahead and skip through. These are just, you know, quotes that I don't need to have right here. Keep going. So the nucleus colonies in my apiary, go back one. There you go. The nucleus colonies in my apiary, you know, I started keeping bees in 74. And it took a while to learn, you know, of course. And then in 82, I got a job managing Shazy Orchard's bees on the other side of Lake Champlain. And in 86, I bought their 500 hives. So now I had a contract. And I had a contract to pollinate their orchard with 600 hives. And everything went great until about 89, 88, whatever, when tracheal mites showed up. And then 89 when varroa mites showed up. And it was a double whammy. And here we are now. We're losing 25, 30% of our bees every year. And the ones that were left weren't the greatest. So I'm buying bees to restock my dead outs so that I could fulfill my contract. So all the money from my contract was going to buy new bees. Well, that wasn't working out so great. So Webster asked me to come down and see what he was doing. That was around late 90s. And I go to his apiary, and he's got nucleus colonies wintering on top of production hives, and these little double nuke boxes with this little entrance with a beard of bees hanging out the entrance. And here it is 2 weeks before apple pollination, and I'm having to buy bees, spend my money on buying bees. And here he is with all these bees before apple pollination that are ready to go. So the light went on, you know. So that really got me thinking. Go ahead. So I decided that's what I'm going to do. So where do you start? Go ahead. So I started by taking brood from strong hives, just like you would a split. Go ahead. And you know, that worked okay, but I kind of had the feeling, well, I've got all these beehives that aren't making any honey. What about that? Go ahead. What about sacrificing a non-productive colony? So here you are, we've got a honey crop on, and but what about this poor little guy? Now, what would you do with that hive? You would probably requeen it. And maybe next year it's going to be a better colony. Well, maybe it's not. Requeening it doesn't mean it's going to be a better colony. Requeening it doesn't even mean it's going to live through the winter. So suppose we sacrifice that colony. Go ahead. And suppose I took that colony that's non-productive and I split it up into nucleus colonies. Well, I can get at least 4 nucleus colonies out of that one non-productive hive. And I don't mean sick. And I don't mean diseased. I don't mean full of mites. I mean healthy but non-productive. So I can get at least 4 nucleus colonies out of that and winter them over. And even if I had a 25% loss in them, even if I had a 50% loss, then I still got 2 colonies. It's still better than 1. Go ahead. So that's what I started doing. I started sacrificing non-productive colonies. And these are the nuke boxes I use. You know, there's just all kinds of nuke boxes you can use. You don't need to use the kind I use. There's just, you use what's available to you, what you can make, what you can buy. But, you know, the one at 9 o'clock, that's Webster's nuke box with a movable divider, division board feeder. I started with that. I got discouraged with it because when you transfer the nukes into a 10 frame, you got to spy the queen, because often enough she's in that feeder. And so then you got to put everything back in and then come back another day. No, I'm not doing that. So I moved over to the 12 o'clock, where it's still a four comb cavity on either side of the divider, but it's a solid divider. So if I put all the combs in a 10 frame and all the bees, I got the queen. I don't have to look quite so hard for the queen. He started me off using bags as at 11 o'clock, a grain bag as the inner cover. And I used that for quite a while. You can see here's a grain bag at 9 o'clock, a grain bag at 3 o'clock. But since I have to wrap the hives, and the grain bag overhangs, and then you have to wrap the hive with tar paper, and okay, so the bag is tucked up underneath the paper, and then you want to look at it in the spring, and you just pull the bag out, and you look to see everything's okay, and you try to stick the bag back in. It takes you longer to stick the bag back in than it does to look at the hive. So I went started making inner covers like at 6 o'clock. And now all my nukes have inner covers, individual inner covers with feed holes, and I like that better. But you can have, there's all kinds. I mean, there's even these silly styrofoam ones. Some people in the world, they really like styrofoam. But in the UK, everybody's got styrofoam beehives. They love those things. I kind of tease them. It's like keeping your bees in a beer cooler, But go ahead. So what we do is to sacrifice a non-productive hive. You decide which hive you're going to sacrifice, and you spread the empty nuke boxes around the hive, and you start taking out frames of brood and honey and bees. And usually when you start working on the top box, on the outside combs, they're going to be honey. So you pull a frame of honey out and you put it against the divider, and you pull another frame of honey out and you put it against the other side of the divider. And now you're into the brood, and you pull out a nice frame of brood and put it next to the honeys. And you pull out another frame of brood. It can be a partial, it can be 1.5 frames of brood. Really, if you're on the main flow, you really only need 1.5 frames of brood, a frame of honey, and an empty comb. And I find the empty combs in the bottom box because this is a non-productive. And so they all wind up with a frame of honey and 1.5 frames or 2 frames of brood and an empty comb at the outside wall, and enough bees, just enough bees to cover the brood. You don't need to pack the thing. We're not trying to build a full-size colony. We're only trying to build this thing up strong enough so it will winter. I found that, for instance, in the picture on the right, the one up in the back, you see how full of bees that is? That thing is way too full of bees. That thing will swarm before as soon as the queen comes out of the cage. I mean, they're going to explode. When you get that brood, that 1.5 frames or 2 frames of brood emerge with that population, forget about it. So you can see that the hive in the front, that's what it's supposed to look like. Just enough bees to cover the brood. And they're already making their semicircles, aren't they? And the thing's only been in there for 15 minutes. They're already starting to act like that. Go ahead. And then you give them a ripe cell, or go ahead, or a caged queen. I prefer caged queens. Yeah, I preferred caged queens. When you use a cell, you don't get 100% return, do you? So you can get anywhere from 50% to 90 something percent, but it's usually 70% or 80%. Well, that means you lose 20%. And maybe they'll raise their own, but you're sacrificing all this bees and brood, and you just lost some of them. So with mated queens, which I raise, we made 335 or something like this last year, and we had 5 that rejected the queen I gave them. Much better averages. So I really rely on my own mated queens. So when you do that, this is what you expect to see in the springtime. This is just after snow melts. So this is, depending on the weather, this is late March, early April, probably early April. These things, I could already transfer these into a 10-frame box. Go ahead. So now at this point in the process, production colonies are supporting the nucleus colonies. We're using up production colonies that are non-productive to set up our nucleus colonies to overwinter. Go ahead. At what cost? Go ahead. Sacrifice production because you're sacrificing production colonies. Go ahead. Right? You're sacrificing production, but that's where you have to start. You got to start somewhere. So that's where I started. So now we've got these nucleus colonies and we have to manage them. Go ahead. Next. So swarming and absconding. Swarming, one of the biggest issues with nucleus colonies is swarming, obviously. You got a small cavity. You're trying to keep a colony small. They don't want to stay small. They don't want to stay in a small box. And when I first started, I was following Webster and, you know, pulling brood out, putting in new combs or foundation, and eventually they just get away. They build up so fast on 4 combs that and so I had just had a heck of a time. And absconding is when it gets so hot and humid and they can't cool the cavity off and they leave. And there's no queen cells in the hive, none. They just leave with the queen. And so when you go look at it, there's emergency cells because there's no queen, but there's still brood emerging. And there were bees out in the field when the abscond left. So those return to find out that, what's going on here? They start raising queen cells. So there is a population not big enough to have made all that brood and emergency cells. And that's how you tell the difference. Go ahead. So Webster's method was to expand the colony by moving the feeder over and adding 4 more combs to the nuke. And the second nuke from the other side goes in another box with 4 more combs. But now you need 2 bottoms and 2 boxes and 2 feeders and 2 covers and 2 bags, and it's a lot more of equipment. Go ahead. And it didn't really seem to work that well because bees don't really like to expand horizontally. Bees like to expand vertically. And so you could add comb or foundation to that expanding nucleus colony, and they don't see that the far end of the box is expansion room that they need immediately right now, and they'll swarm. So then I tried putting excluders on top of double nukes, and you put a super on, and sure enough, they go right up there and they work side by side, all mixed up. They don't fight. The bees from this side don't cross over and go to the other side and kill the queen, or vice versa. They just get along fine. And then when you want to take the honey off, you put a triangular escape on the excluder, you put the super or supers back on, they all go down into whichever nuke they go into, and you take the honey off. And they don't even fight. Problem is that every drop of honey's gone in the supers, and there's nothing down below the excluder. So now you have to immediately feed them. Well, I didn't like that way either. It does work, but I didn't like that way either. Go ahead. So then I was pulling brood out. And making more nukes. So I take one of those 4 frame boxes and I pull a frame of brood out and put a comb in or put a foundation in, and they build right back up again and they get stronger than before. I pulled out 2 frames. I put in 2 foundations, one at the divider, one at the sidewall, and they'd fill them right out. I had the main bee inspector came over one time, and I had put foundation in like this at 10 o'clock in the morning. I took him out there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the foundation had about an eighth of an inch at the most of comb drawn out, and they're already full of eggs. They were drawing the foundation out as the brood grew. It was just crazy. That's what it's like. And then they get ahead of you, and then they swarm or abscond in the heat. So go ahead. So you remember Brother Columban, what I said, remember him? And he invented, he was from Buckfast Abbey. This is Buckfast Abbey. That's the new abbey that was built, probably started in the late 1800s. Brother Adam worked at on the stone as a kid, finishing stones. The gray part next to it is the original 12th century building that, the abbey was knocked down. was destroyed by you know who, right? Henry VIII. So this is the part on the right, the gray stone, that's the original. And the original abbey was destroyed. So this is the new abbey. But anyway, go ahead. So so Brother Columban wintered nucleus colonies and then used the excess brood where he needed it in the apiary. Well, I thought, gosh, that's a pretty brilliant idea, isn't it? I could do that too. I could, instead of using up all my nucleus colonies and putting them in 10 frames and hives and trying to make them production hives, suppose I just left them in the brood configuration, let them expand upwards onto more combs, and then just harvest the brood from them. That's what I call brood factories, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Go ahead. So when I first started off, as I said, I started wintering, trying to manage them in single-story nuke boxes. Go ahead. And this is what an apiary would look like at the time, you know, with a number of nucleus colony, double nukes, and this is a production yard. And I used to keep them all together. Go ahead. But that means moving bees, right? So you make the nuke. You move it to its apiary, and then you have to winter them on top of a beehive because you can't winter them in singles here because they get buried in the snow and they'll never get a cleansing flight. So then you move them to the top of beehives and you winter them there and you wrap them all up. And then when you want to inspect the production hive down below in the springtime, you got to take the nuke box off and inspect and put it back on. And then when you want to transfer them and start transferring them into 10 frames, you got to move them again, put them someplace else. And it's just crazy. So you move them 3 or 4 times. Well, after I pollinated apples for 20 years and I moved 600 hives, a lot of those years by hand, I got sick of moving bees. I don't ever want to move another beehive as long as I live. You know, I will, but I hate doing it. So I just thought there must be a better way. Go ahead. So there is a better way than managing singles. Yep, next. And so we have to think like a bee. Bees think up, right? They don't think out. They don't think horizontally. They will. If they're forced to, they'll move horizontally. They'd much rather move up. What's the natural cavity of a bee in the European bee? What's the natural cavity? It's a tree. Trees do not grow horizontally, they grow vertically. This is where it comes from. So think like a bee and think up. Go ahead. So this is a nice nucleus colony that's probably made about 10 days ago, 10, 12 days ago. You know, I check it for the queen, make sure the queen is laying. And then I decided, well, suppose instead of putting them in another nuke box with a movable divider, and I add 4 more combs and try to get them to move horizontally. Suppose I just put another little box on top with 4 combs in it, 4 foundations in it. So that's what I did. I made some 4 comb supers that they meets over the divider so they can't cross over. And I put 4 foundations in there. And I said, isn't that cool? Yeah, that was real cool until they all swarmed. because bees don't see overhead foundation as expansion room. Look at the population on these things. They need room right now. And I'm not saying every one of them swarmed, but a lot of them did because they don't see that overhead foundation as expansion room. But this is what I do now. This is how I manage them all now. They all get extra boxes so they can expand vertically. Go ahead. And so it takes less equipment, right? 1 bottom, 1 box, and these 2 little supers. That's all the extra equipment you need right now. You don't need double boxes and feeders and move them all, and just simple. So it's much less equipment. They love to expand up. Go ahead. And but remember, I said you can't add foundation. So what I do now is 10 days, about 10 days after I set the nuke up and have given them a caged queen is when I like to look for see if the queen is released and laying. 6, 7 days is pushing it. That's a little early and you really have to look for eggs. 8, 9, 10 days, it's great. It's real easy. There's jelly and there's lots of larvae and all that. And so, you know, immediately it doesn't take any time to look. And if you wait too long and if you wait 2 weeks and they didn't accept your queen, there's going to be emergency cells emerging because you waited too long. So at 10 days, if there's emergency cells, they won't have emerged yet. You're not looking for a virgin. You just cut out the emergency cells and give them another queen. And they'll almost always accept it the second time. And so what I do is, remember I said that you put the frame with some honey on it, not a big crystallized cap to over full frame of honey, but you know, one that's got a nice rim of honey and some nectar and all like that. And you put it against the divider. Funny thing about these colonies, and it's the reason that they make that semicircular cluster, which means that the whole thing is one cluster with the divider shoved down between them, as Miller says, is because the divider is the center of the brood nest. These two combs, the two center combs, are not the center of the brood nest. The divider is the center of the brood nest. So what do? Do they accept honey in the middle of in the center of their brood nest? No. So they move it out and she lays in it. And so at 10 days, there's brood in that frame. So I remove that and put either a foundation or a comb down below. And then I put this little super on top and I take that frame of brood from down below and I put it in this position against the divider. And then I put 3 frames of foundation. What have I accomplished? I have accomplished putting brood next to foundation. Now they have brood and bees in contact with the foundation. It's not just stuck up above someplace. They're against it. It's a violation of bee space. They don't like that. They draw it out immediately. She starts to lay in it immediately. So that's about 10 days after installation with the new queen. Go ahead. And then in about 2 weeks, you have to go back again. And so the comb on the far right here, you can see it's a dark comb. That is that brood comb that I moved up. But look at the next 2 combs and even the third one over. At about 2 weeks after installation, they've already drawn it out and filled it with brood. And now they're even starting they got a queen cup. Probably has an egg in it. Looks like it has an egg in it. I don't know. So you have to be managing these things all the time. And so, yeah. And so what I usually do is, if I take them apart at say 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks after I put the second box on, and they're starting this foolishness with queen cups and eggs in them, and you know, early preparations for swarming, I'll remove all of those, and I'll get a box with 4 nice brood combs, and I'll stick it right between the 2 boxes, right between the bottom and the top level. And now there's all this empty comb space right in the middle of their brood nest, and they go, oh my God, we aren't very strong at all. And they give up all that swarming business. It's just done. So now you've got these nucleus colonies, and what can you do with them? Well, you can replace your winter losses. We're going to use a lot of I'm not selling nukes this year. I lost 25% of my colonies in September this year, August, September. We had mite counts that went from zeros in April, zeros in May. The inspector came and checked all the mating nukes and everything, zeros, never saw a mite. Go there to do some requeening in July after we get done making nukes, and we got 20s and 30s and 50s. Huh? Where did they come from? I don't know. So we lost a bunch of bees. But I got 300 nucleus colonies. So we're going to replace all the dead bees with nucleus colonies. Or making increase. You want more beehives? Great. Make increase. Or what about the weak colony? You got a weak colony coming out of winter? And what do you do with that? Yeah, you requeen it, you nurse it, you give it brood, you know, like that. Well, you could requeen it and give it brood immediately if you got rid of the old queen, and you put a nuke in it. Boom, done. Producing income, yep. Bonnie sells nukes. It's probably one of her biggest incomes. It is for me. It's a huge income selling these nucleus colonies. Making brood factories. We're going to talk about brood factories in a minute. But you'll just let, like this picture here with these two really strong nucleus colonies, you put another story or two on top of that and turns it into a brood factory, and you pull brood out of it periodically and use it where you need it in your apiary, a la Brother Columba. You can use it for from the brood factories. You can use that brood for setting up very strong cell builders, making huge, enormous cell builders that, because of the population of nurse bees, are going to make excellent queen cells. Or you can use it as the source for making nucleus colonies. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Go ahead. So once you have a supply of nuclei, go ahead. The nucleus colonies now support the production colonies. Can you see that? Right? Remember before it was the production colonies were supporting the nucleus colonies. Now with brood factories that are dedicated only for making brood and bees to be used, now the nucleus colonies are supporting the production colonies. So what supports the nucleus colonies? Go ahead. Brood factories. Go ahead. So I came up with this slide, and I think it describes pretty well what's going on and what the basis of my apiary is. Okay, so the nucleus colonies support the production colonies. The production colonies give breeding stock to the mating nuclei. The mating nuclei give queens to the nucleus colonies, and so on and so forth, and around and around. And the whole system supports itself. And that's why I consider it to be sustainable. Go ahead. So, as I said, the nucleus colonies support the production colonies. The production colonies give breeding stock to the mating nuclei, and the mating nuclei give queens to the nucleus colonies. So here we go. These are strong, overwintered nukes, two-story nukes, two in a box. You can see on the upper right hand, you can see some yellow. So this is dandelion. I haven't cut the grass yet, so this has got to be May. Probably middle of May. And go ahead, these are going to be brood factories. And I add more stories to them to build them up because they're getting strong. They're going to swarm if I don't keep them actively expanding. Go ahead. So then it's time to pull some brood. And so we pull, I'll pull a frame or two of brood. I have about 100 brood factories. And so I'll go down the row of the first brood factory yard, and you know, you open the nuke up. This one will give me one. I want to pull enough so they don't swarm before I get back there, but not so much that they dwindle, because I want them expanding and growing brood. So if they give me one, they give me one. If they give me two, they give me two. And I'll replace it with comb, and I like to replace it in the middle box with comb against the divider. So if I pull out one or two, I'll replace it in the middle box against the divider, and that's right in the center of the queen's brood nest. And it really slows swarming down, way down. Go ahead. And so you can see we take it apart. We take the whole thing apart, and go ahead. And that's what we're pulling out for making cell builders. I want emerging brood. I don't want newly sealed brood. I want it past purple eye stage. I want it to be emerging when I put it in my cell builder, because in 10 days when I graft in there, I want the majority of those bees to be in there, young, ready to be nurses. Go ahead. And so by doing this, we're making whole apiaries now instead of the way I used to do it, where I'll put 20 nucleus colonies, 10 nucleus colonies in a production yard right along with the production hives. Now I'm making whole apiaries full of nothing but nucleus colonies, whole apiaries dedicated to making nucleus colonies. So you're going to make the nucleus colonies. Where do you get your queens from? Well, hopefully you have a provider. You have some queen rearers that are able to give you the product you want, but maybe not. I think you can raise better queens than you can buy, hands down, because you're selecting stock from your own apiary under your management. You can follow the best colonies. You have records on them for maybe years. So you can set up these monster cell building colonies that they're just so full of jelly. So I love to have queens like this. This is what I'm looking for. Go ahead. And so what's one of the most important things in maybe the most important thing in raising quality queens? We want quality. We don't want quantity. We want quality. It's all about the royal jelly. Maximizing the amount of royal jelly that's fed to your queen cells, to your larvae. And how do you maximize the royal jelly produced? By maximizing the number of nurse bees. And how do you do that? By building giant colonies with emerging brood that in 10 days or whatever later, that colony is going to be so full of nurse bees. Go ahead. So where do the nurse bees come? Well, this is the typical swarm box starter. And you shake nurse bees out of a number of colonies into your cell builder, and you wait the 24 hours or whatever. Well, that uses up production hives. Production hives, for me, a production hive is supposed to be a production hive. It's supposed to produce honey for me. So I don't like this method. Go ahead. And brood donors, you can use brood donors like Brother Adam. He's the one that started this thing with his method of cell building is to add a box of emerging brood above a queen excluder on a strong colony, and that eventually becomes your cell builder. But now you're pulling brood out of production colonies, and production colonies are supposed to be production colonies. Go ahead. That's not sustainable in the apiary unless you have a lot of extra beehives. Go ahead. Go ahead. So what's the answer? Brood factories. So the brood factories produce all the brood you need to build these enormous colonies. Go ahead. And you can leave your production hives alone. Go ahead, one more. So this is a cell building colony. So the bottom 3 boxes is my typical brood, my typical hive. The brood nest is 2 deeps and a medium. And then at some point at the end of April, we put on 2 honey supers with no excluder. And then about May 9th, I start setting up cell builders. So I take one of the supers that's got full of nectar, and it doesn't have any brood in it or anything, just nectar, no queen or anything. And I elevate that over the queen excluder. And then I go to my brood factories, and I pull out a box of, I set up this green box with a frame of honey at each sidewall and 7 frames of emerging brood and bees. And I put that on top of the honey super. And so imagine when you have a colony suppose it's got 8 or 10 frames of brood already, and you put on 7 more combs of brood, and you walk away from it, what would happen? Probably they're going to swarm. They're going to get hugely strong. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to foster the swarming impulse. I don't want to let them swarm, but I want them strong enough. I want them strong enough, full of nurse bees and resources, so that when they start raising queen cells, they're really going to raise some nice queen cells. Go ahead. And so then on grafting day, I take the brood box and the super off. I turn the the queen right part of the hive 180 degrees around and put it on the ground, and put a new bottom on the original stand in the original direction, and put the super on, and then that box of brood. And so by being in this position, they get the field force. Go ahead. They get the field force. I take the queen right part of the hive apart, and I shake the core of the brood nest through a queen excluder box. So harvesting all the nurse bees that are in the queen right, leaving the queen behind, of course, and enough bees to take care of the brood there. And when I do that in the morning, and I come back in the afternoon to graft, and this is what I find: an enormous colony that's so packed with bees that they can't help but make nice queen cells. Go ahead. And so I do my graft. I put my graft into the into that unit with a good frame of pollen, and I put my graft in. Go ahead. And this is what the result is: enormous queen cells packed with jelly. Even on the day 10 after grafting, when you put them in nukes, they're still full of jelly. Make enormous pupae, which makes those big queens. And it's all because of the maximization of the jelly. Go ahead. And this is what we get. We get beautiful big queen cells with jelly still in there. Really large pupae. Go ahead. And because I'm doing this, so we pull the queen cells. So this is a strong hive. This the box that says 36. That's got the cells in it, and that's your super on the top. You harvest those day 10 after graft. So you set it up with the brood from the brood factories. You wait 10 days to graft. You graft into it. You wait 10 days for the cells to be sealed. You remove the cells. You take them to the mating yard. You come back. You can reestablish this colony as a cell builder again by adding another box of brood to it. But in the meantime, that box that has 36, you pulled out the frame, the cell bar frame, and it's full of bees. There's just a little bit of brood still not emerged, but it's full of bees just crying out for a queen. You put that on the bottom board, you take it to another apiary, and you give it a queen cell, and you get a colony out of it. So not only are you getting a round of queen cells, then you reestablish it. And so I'm getting a round of queen cells every 20 days plus a colony, which is a twist that we started last summer. And I really like that, because I'm not just wasting brood. It's not wasting. I'm not just expending brood to make queen cells. I'll get a round of queen cells, and then I'll get another colony. And then I'll get another round of queen cells, then I'll get another colony. So that works pretty well. We get at least 2 like that, and some of them we get 3, but we don't take the 3rd colony. So we're getting 3 rounds of queen cells and 1 or 2 colonies out of every one of these. Go ahead. And because these colonies are so big, that they're also producing honey. So we're having to add supers to them all the time because they get so strong. So I think I must have made a couple of tons of honey in the cell building yard this particular year. They're not always like this, but this particular year I must have made 2 tons of honey out of this yard, plus enough queens for 1,200, enough cells for 1,200 queens, plus some extra colonies that just happen to be from the overflow. It's pretty incredible what you can do when you have excess brood from brood factories. Go ahead. Now we have to winter them. Typical of my area. Yeah, we got to winter them. Go ahead. Next. So we have to feed them. We got to make sure that they have enough food. So, you know, we lift them, we lift the top box, if there's 3, lift the middle box, get an estimate on how much food they need to eat, and feed them as such. So we can feed them with, if you're using the bags, you can fold the bag back, or you can fill that feeder that up in the, at 11 o'clock, you can fill the feeder, but they put comb in it and you can't put enough food in there. You got to keep coming back and back. So you can use cans, gallon cans on the bags, but I get rid of the bags. So now we're using gallon cans right on the inner cover. But still, if they needed 2 gallons, then you got to come back and refill the can. Well, no, you don't, because you put on 2 gallons at once, center them over the 2 cans centered over the feed hole. They'll come up and feed on both cans at once, and in a week you got 2 gallons down, boom, done. So that's usually, most of them need 1 or 2 gallons. Once in a while you need a 3, but 1 or 2 gallons is usually enough. You know, you don't need to feed them so every cell in the colony in the hive is full of food. They still need cluster space, just like a production colony. You know, they still need empty cells down in there so that they can have a cluster space and regulate the core of their brood nest temperature in the wintertime. And so go ahead. As this indicates. So if you can see this from the hive and the honeybee, you can see what most of the combs in the top box are full of honey. That's what that drawing indicates. You can see where the pollen is stored in the top box. You can see where the cluster of bees is between the frames, right? And they get a little dotted line that goes in that shows where the cluster is. Well, you look at the core of the brood nest. Aren't there empty cells there? Of course there are. What are those empty cells for? For cluster space. How do they regulate the temperature of the brood nest? Well, the more of those cells that have a bee in there, the higher the temperature. And if they need to lower the temperature, they vacate some of those cells and it cools it off a little bit. But if everything is full of feed, they can't regulate the temperature of the brood nest. It's like sleeping on a cold water bed. You know, it sucks the heat out of you. Well, these combs of honey are a heat sink. So they need that cluster space. So you don't need to feed everything. So I would say a 2-story 4-frame nuke probably needs the top box full, and 2 combs in the bottom, the outside 2 combs in the bottom box full, and maybe a bit in the 2 inner combs, but definitely cluster space. And that cluster space will almost always be located toward the entrance. Almost always. Go ahead. So now we have to get them ready for winter. And so we wrap them just like we do production colonies. So the one on the left, the photo on the left, you can see it's got an upper entrance. It's got a bottom entrance. In this style, I was making the entrances on the side, which I don't do anymore. And now I make them right below that B, on below 40 and the B, and there's the entrance right there, and it's right below that top entrance. So when you close that top entrance, if you need to close that for the summer with a piece of tape, they just crawl right down and learn the new one. So we start with, we put a piece of styrofoam on the inner covers, and we put a tar paper wrapper around the box, make sure that the upper entrance is open, and tie the cover down. Go ahead. This is actually the cell, but one of the cell building yards, with one of the brood factories. So this cell building yard has around 30 strong colonies for cell builders, and around 60 nucleus colonies to be used as brood factories. So all I have to do is carry the bees and brood right across the yard and set up cell builders. Go ahead. I always like to ask this question. Do you? Do you love your day job? A lot of people have day jobs. They don't love them much. Go ahead. But it's how they have to make their income. So in 2011, from 50 overwintered nucleus colonies, go ahead. So I started with 50 overwintered nucleus colonies that I made, turned into brood factories. And from May 9th to June 19th, I harvested 245 frames of brood and set up 35 cell builders. So that's 245. Then about June 16th, I changed over. I'm just about done with cell building. So I changed over to making nucleus colonies, and I used the excess brood in the brood factories to stock 330 nucleus colonies. So from 50 nucleus colonies, I raised all the queen cells I need, and I made 330 nucleus colonies, all from brood factories, and get whole apiaries like this. Let me say something about the brood factories. So you start in the springtime, and they're double. They're 2-story 4 combs or 3-story 4 combs, 4/4/4, and they start to build up, and you have to add comb to them, and they keep building up, and you have to add more comb to them, and so they get up into 4, 5 stories high, sometimes 6. And so you're building them up, and then you take some brood out, and you build them back up, and you take some brood out, and you replace the comb, and you take some more brood out. And then you get far enough into the season, you take the top box of brood off, and then you get a little farther along, and you knock them down so there's 3 or 4 combs of brood left in the bottom box, and then some empty comb, and then a box or 2 of honey that was on there anyway, because they do make honey. They'll make a box or 2 of honey, a 4-frame box or 2 of honey. So what we're doing is we're building them up and building them up and taking them down and building them up and taking them down and building them up and taking them down and taking them down, and then letting them build back up for winter. And that's a brood factory. Where do you go from here? Go ahead. Well, most places they got a club. Maybe you can't raise queen bees. Maybe you need some lessons, so you start a club project on how to grow nucleus colonies. Go ahead. But you can't get you can't get queens. The problem, you guys are different because you're out there in California and you're raising queens. I don't know if they're raising queens already. Probably they are raising queens already. But we can't get queens mated here and until June. And while people want to sell their queens early in the season when the demand is, and the demand is you split strong colonies and you requeen colonies in the spring, and that's when the demand is. Well, the local guys, nobody wants their queens because they come too late. Well, if you create the demand because you're growing nucleus colonies in the middle of the summer when the season is at its height, and the resources are actually the best for raising queens, so you can get better queens. Now you've created some demand for your local queen producers. Now they'll start raising your queens at the time when you need to make your nucleus colonies. Go ahead. Anyway, that's my sustainable apiary. You can see why I'm doing it. I tried to explain why I'm doing it. That it's the nucleus colonies are supporting my whole system here. If I didn't have my nucleus colonies, I'd be out of business. I would, or I'd have to buy bees. I don't want to go back to buying bees. I like my bees. I don't want to pollinate. There's no way in hell that I'm going to put my bees on a truck and take them to California to pollinate almonds or blueberries in Maine or apples in New York or anything. I'm done pollinating. It's terrible on the bees. It's really rough on the bees. It's rough on the equipment. It's rough on the help and the everything. So this is so much better. I'm doing much better now, raising queens, making nukes, selling a few nukes, making nice honey crops. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for being here. Does anyone have any questions for Mike?
Yeah, I can answer whatever questions you want.
And while while you're thinking about your questions, for those of you who tuned in a little later, I was chatting with Mike about the fact that, his system works really well here. Our system is very different. Our timing is very different. We have to do our summer queens around by the end of June. to really make them sustainable. However, what he's doing in Vermont, even though their queens go out later than ours do, our season is really February to May. And for all of you, because most of you I know just have 1 or 2 backyard colonies, just doing a nuke during the summer not only will help you in case you have losses, which we all do, especially, gosh, with these terrible wildfires, which are causing a lot of other additional problems other than just the mites and the diseases. Most of our buildup happens, our season is really February to May. So that system really could work for all of us. So does anyone have any questions while I was just talking about that? Go ahead and unmute yourself and just speak out if you do have one. Oh, come on. There's 80 of you out there. I know you have questions. Yeah.
What do you feed them in those gallon or those tins?
2-to-1 sugar syrup, 2 sugar, 1 water,
2-to-1.
65%. And it's real easy to make, and you don't have to weigh anything. You don't have to measure anything. If you took a bucket of empty bucket, and you make a magic marker line inside the bucket somewhere down below the rim, and you fill it to that mark with granulated sugar, and then you fill it to that mark with hot water and stir it and stir it and stir it. The level's going to go down because of the air and the sugar, and you top it off, and when the water stays at the black mark, it's 65% every time.
Thank you.
I had a question about your configuration on that production fruit, the hive. You had a hive with 2 deeps, and then I believe you had 2 honey supers, and then you put your brood production on top of that. What keeps those young nurse bees up there?
Well, they don't all stay up there, obviously. They're emerging all the time. But a lot of them are lured down below to where they're needed as nurse bees. That's why I shake the core of the brood nest through a queen excluder into the cell builder on grafting day morning, so that the nurse bees are in the cell builder. So the core of the brood nest of the queen right colony is where the nurse bees, the majority of the nurse bees, are going to be.
Okay.
You shake them through an excluder so you don't get any queens.
How many mother colonies do you like to graft from?
I usually have 5 or 6 a year.
That's rather a small number for what, 500 hives?
Yeah, it is rather a small number, but they change every year. So we keep them, we use them 1 year, and anything that's exceptional, we use 1 more year and get some new ones and try them out this year.
So what is your criteria for picking a mother colony?
I have a yard sheet, and it's got everything on there. A lot of criteria on there. Temper, diseases present. Chalk brood is a really good marker for hygienicness. So no chalk brood. If 1 cell of chalk brood eliminates any colony from the breeding pool. Honey production. Weight of the colony. We weigh all the colonies in September after the goldenrod flow. As soon as you can't smell the goldenrod anymore, we start weighing colonies, and we feed them accordingly. What was your question again? I forgot.
Criteria for selecting a queen.
Yeah, my old brain, yes. And so that's one of the criteria. And temper, as I said. Longevity of the colony. I like these colonies that go on year after year after year, and they supersede themselves, and you never see a dip in production. So they're going on and on for years, and obviously it's not the same queen. And so those ones that never have a dip in production, obviously they didn't swarm, and they're not waiting till the queen is failing before they replace her. They have a schedule. It's all their own. And they never miss a beat. I like those colonies because I want a colony that knows how to supersede themselves at the correct time and not fail.
So you don't typically see colonies that have a queen that's older than a year or so.
I see colonies that are 2, 3, at least 3 years old, occasionally a 4-year-old. Yeah, my queens live pretty long. Also, have they ever started swarm cells? I'm trying to find stock that has a lower propensity to swarm, and the propensity to swarm is genetic. And how do I find colonies that have a low propensity to swarm if I split my bees all the time in the spring so that they won't swarm? So I never split bees in the spring anymore. I make nukes in the summertime. I prevent swarming by management. And so I can build gigantic production colonies that make, 2 years ago, we had a lot of colonies that made 240 pounds. And so I can make these gigantic colonies, which if I split them up, see, if you split a colony in the spring to make a nuke, and the conditions are perfect the rest of the summer, you make a nice honey crop, the nuke builds up, might make a super, whatever. What happens if it's cold and wet when you make the split, and then it's cold and wet, and then nothing builds up correctly, or so then you don't get a honey crop, and nobody builds up back up right. Or what happens if it builds up right, and now it's honey flow time, and they're strong enough to make, and you have a drought, and you miss the honey flow.
So Mike, just though, like for everyone who's listening, Mike's season in Vermont is very different than our Marin climate. So for many of our bees, they're building up now, and many of them, like their season of comb building, even though it's not swarm season, is now through May. And Mike was talking about local nukes not being available till later. Well, the reason of that is, even though a lot of our bees are building because the ukes are blooming and a lot of things are going to be blooming, there's not adequate drone mating, adult drones for mating until later in the season. But Mike, you were talking about, like, you guys start breeding queens in June, right?
Yep, my first cell builders are set up on the 9th of May. First graft is the 19th. First cells are the 29th. First queens we pull on June 13th.
So I know Jennifer is starts hers earlier than I do. Mine are usually around middle of March. So, like, keep everything in perspective. Like, everything Mike's saying is true. We're just on a different schedule than Vermont,
For sure. Everybody's on a different schedule than Vermont.
Yeah.
So those are pretty much the things that I look for. Just basic what you want from a good bee. You don't want them to swarm. You don't want them to have chalk brood. You don't want them to staple your socks to your ankle. You don't, things like that. I mean, and then you keep track over years and years. In 2015, I pulled a queen from a colony, and the original colony got set up in 2001. And that colony was the top producer in its apiary every year from 2002 until 2015 or 14 when I pulled that queen. Is it the same queen? No, it wasn't the same queen, but that's what I'm talking about. A colony that knows how to supersede, and they requeen themselves by supersedure, not by swarming, because there's two ways a colony requeens himself, right? Supersedure and swarming. And some colonies will swarm every single year. They'll swarm every year because they want a new queen, and that's how they do it. And some colonies will never swarm, and they'll requeen themselves by supersedure. Every year or two, they got a new queen in there, and they go on and on and on. I'm looking for that kind of a colony.
I have a question. I resonated with one of the things that you said because I often have large colonies that are doing well, and I feel bad making splits out of them because I feel like it's kind of a not the greatest use of resources. I'd rather have that colony just flourish and make a bigger crop of honey for me. So in my circumstances, I have a few colonies like this that have overwintered and are larger. And then I experimented and overwintered a bunch of nucleus colonies. Do you think coming out of winter, I should just take those nucleus colonies and split them into more nucleus colonies? Because previously when I overwintered nucleus colonies, I would just let them expand, instead of splitting them up.
Yeah, make them all be production hives.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's what I did. That's why I have brood factories, a number of them, and after a few years, you'll know what that number is, what you need.
Mm-hmm.
You don't put them in it. You just let them build up in their new configuration. They just seem to build up better in the vertical configuration than in horizontal, and just make sure you keep enough comb on them, and that's what you make your nukes from. That's what you make your new hives from. Those things, and you let your production hives be production hives. Now, yeah, you're going to say, well, they're going to swarm. Some will, and I'm not saying you don't ever split a hive. I'm saying don't let splitting the hive be your default swarm control method.
Mm-hmm.
Splitting a hive should be the last thing you do. It's like you've given up. You give up. I can't. These things will not respond to me. Split them up.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll be surprised how many colonies, if you just manage them properly, however it is you do it, reversing brood chambers, adding more supers, whatever, how many won't swarm, and they'll make giant. And once we get them into the honey production time, and you keep enough supers on them, they just seem to give up swarming. They want to make honey. They don't want to swarm. Swarming is the early season kind of a thing.
All right, thank you.
Mike, just a quick question for you. Number one, thank you, Bonnie, for the presentation, and Mike, thank you for all the information. It's very appreciated. Have you found a correlation in the queen rearing side with your cell builders to where if you graft a smaller amount versus a medium-sized amount versus a large amount going into the same box, that will have an impact on your queens and the quality of your queens?
Yeah, I probably, probably they would put more resources into the cells if you didn't have as strong a cell builder and you only had, say, 20 cells instead of 48. I would think. I think Brother Adam used 20. I think he only put 20 in.
Okay, so probably
I put 48, and I get really good results with 48. So
okay, and probably best to err on the lesser side.
Absolutely
for quality.
Okay, for sure. If you if you're doing what you're doing and you're getting little stumpy cells, you need to change something.
Okay.
You need to make them stronger. You need to have more nurse bees. You need to have more resources, better pollen comb, better feed, more nurse bees.
And I would encourage those locally here listening to this who feel confident, like with trying queen rearing, because so many people are smaller beekeepers. Like, I mean, but I think keeping things local is like, encouraging people who just have a few hives or one or two hives to share that stock. Like, if there are people that feel confident with this, put it out there if you're going to be raising queens, or you have queen cells that are getting ripe that when they're going to be done, let people know. Let's share them as a community for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good plan. That's what I mean about having a club and starting a queen rearing program. And you might not have the resources, but maybe you could participate in some way and get a couple of queen cells out of the program and learn how at the same time.
Yeah,
thank you, Mike. Thank you, Bonnie.
It's all a work in progress, right, Mike? But we seem to be going in the right direction as beekeepers locally, right?
Right. Yep. We have 4-way mating nukes, and we've been getting about 70 to 75% return on mated queens. And I don't think that's good enough. I'd like to get it up to 80. And so we're gonna do a whole group of 2 ways instead of 4 ways to see if maybe that's the problem. Maybe they're coming back in and they're going in the wrong hole. You know, we kept a track. We keep a track on top of every time we catch. There's a piece of tape on top, and the 4 quarters are delineated. And if you take a queen, it's minus Q. If there's no queen there and there's no eggs there and it's queenless, it's QL. You know, if it's a dead in cell, it's DIC. If it's, you know, if it's NF, if you can't find the queen, then it's an NFQ. But anyway, by far the largest number is queenless, which means the cell hatched, she went out on her mating flight, and she never made it to the right hole coming back. And that's, you know, and they're queenless. There's no emergency cells because they thought they had a queen. There's no virgin running around. They didn't hatch one of their own. And so that's what it is. So we're trying to figure out, well, what could it be? Let's try some 2 ways and have better landmarks and see if that improves. So we're always learning. We're always changing things and trying to make it better.
And you know, Mike, even for us with small apiaries, like we're having more problems with queens returning, even in small apiaries with,
Right.
you know, like
Yep.
1, 2, 5, 10, you know, like we're
Yeah.
all learning.
Well,
So
we've marked them, painted the covers different colors, and made different colored triangles and all kinds of, you know, it's just so frustrating. You do all the work. We got 128 mating nukes that we're catching every 4 days. We got 4 groups, and so there's 16-day cycle, and you go and you've done all the work, and out of 128 you get 70 queens. You know, it's like, oh my God, there's the profitability right there. There's all that work that we did, and we only got 70 queens out of 128. Really? What happened to the other 50?
A group of us went up to in the foothills with Randy to learn something about queen rearing, and he put his mating nukes out in a big field in all kinds of random different directions. But he also put a bunch of farm equipment. It was all mixed in with a bunch of farm equipment that he felt would give them the landmarks. And as I think you said earlier, that giving them more landmarks will help.
Right.
Have you tried producing a lot more drones for your area, or do you just count on the drones that are there? And have you tried mini nukes, the little half frame nukes?
I haven't tried the mini nukes, but I mean, the 4 ways are mini nukes. There's only 4 full depth, half length combs in each quadrant. So I haven't tried mini nukes. I'm afraid I would think they'd be absconding all over the place. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're doing great if we get great queens, and if we could just figure this, get it up to 80%.
Have you tried?
If we could count on 80%, I'm not asking for 100%.
Have you tried raising drones specifically to increase the number of drones in the area?
The number of drones, yeah. Well, I've got 5 apiaries surrounding my mating yard, production yard. So I've got a lot of drones, I think.
Have you ever tried painting the front of your hives different colors, like where the entrance is?
Yep. And designs on the top of the hive. So if they're coming in from altitude, they can see the one with the X, or the one with the line, or the one with the triangle, or the one, you know. So yeah, we've been trying that too.
To expand on the drone topic just a little bit more, perhaps picking particular hives that you want to force to produce a lot of drone might be beneficial.
It might be. I try to locate as many of my different lines in my production yards around the mating yard that I can, so that I have a good diversity of lines out there, good diversity of drones out there.
So I've got one of those funny stories about a meeting where last year I had about 35 mating boxes, and I kept opening the last box and finding two queens, and they were in the process of killing each other, and one was always being bald, and it happened like 3 or 4 times in a row of checking these queens. So finally, I started just leaving the box empty, and I'd always get a queen in there. So every time I'd go down the row to collect the queens, there'd always be a queen in the box, even though I never had put one in there.
Right. So you think they were drifting into the wrong hole?
Always a drift. Yep, yep.
Yep.
And it was consistent with that particular box, and it was at the end of the row.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Was she in there by herself?
Yeah, when I stopped putting a queen cell in there, I could, inadvertently open it up and only find one queen in there at a time. She'd come from somewhere else.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was like it was the queen collection box rather than the mating box.
Geez, that'd be easy. I'd like to do that. Just could walk up to a box and say, "There, oh, there they are."
I was very lucky that in returning to being a sideliner after a small commercial operation, I was able to get one of your sustainable lectures like 5 years ago and have used the new. I'm really appreciative of your time. And I really am interested in some of the new things that you include in the lecture tonight. I do a little mentoring, and I tell people to watch, and I say, all you have to do is watch Mr. Palmer and then do the math. And he runs 2,000 or 1,000, and you're running 10 or 5. He needs this many, and you need this many. And it really has been very successful with some of the people that I've been working with, and I thank you very much.
Great, thank you for saying that. That's why I do this, People like you is the reason I do it. The reason I bother talking and traveling all over the world, and because I see the same thing, I hear the same thing everywhere I go. It's like, oh my God, I tried this and now I've got more bees than I know what to do with. So.
But what it has done for me is it given me a way to do a small queen production yard and use duplex medium frames for the mating nooks. And then when they get a little big, then they go to the big girl's house and end up being brood factories.
Right.
And if I don't sell the queens, and I don't like to do, I'm not happy with doing, queen holding hives, and I like when somebody comes out to get a queen, I go out live and I pick it out and I show it to them.
Right.
And because it's a side for me, because I'm not like you, I'm very old.
Hey man, I'm 72 in the next 2 weeks.
Listen, yeah, my age starts with an 8. So
yeah, I know.
Anyway, but I think the key thing that I've learned from your talking, and you say it all the time, but it's not exactly like right out there saying it, is it's all about resources. And it's all about how you use your resources and how your resources are balanced. And that's a lesson that I learned from you, and I'm very grateful.
Great, thank you for that.